Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism by Montell. Picture this. You're 13, walking down your street on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, when you hear something that stops you in your tracks. Through an open window drifts this hypnotic hum of voices, chanting in words you've never heard before. You glance up and spot people dressed entirely in white, their faces radiating this almost otherworldly calm. They look like they've found something you didn't even know you were searching for. They look like they belong. This actually happened to a young woman named Tasha. She was a first-generation kid, navigating that awkward age, where everything feels slightly off-kilter, where loneliness can hit you hardest. That mysterious sound, that visible sense of community, pulled her like a magnet. She peeked through the door of that Kundalini yoga studio, and asked the simplest question, "Who are you?" The receptionist smiled, and mentioned something about the science of the mind. Tasha had no clue what that meant, but something inside her whispered, "Stay." Inside that studio, the foreign prayers and unfamiliar words felt ancient, sacred even. For the first time in a long time, she felt connected to something larger than her own confused teenage self. Fast forward 8 years, and Tasha had become a full-time instructor in this group, teaching celebrities like Demi Moore and Russell Brand. She had adopted a new name, a new identity, a new family. But here's the twist. That beautiful, enchanting language that first drew her in? It became the very instrument used to control her, isolate her, and reshape her reality into something that, from the outside looking in, would seem absolutely impossible. That's exactly where we're headed today. We're exploring a genuinely fascinating book by Montell called Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism. And here's what makes this book different from those sensational cult documentaries. This isn't just about wild-eyed leaders and remote compounds. It's about something far more subtle, and honestly far more relevant to your everyday life. It's about the hidden power of language. By the time we're done here, you're going to develop what I'd call a linguistic superpower. You'll start hearing the hidden codes, the emotional triggers, and the persuasive techniques woven through conversations all around you. Not just in those extreme cults, but in your gym, in the startup you work for, across your social media feeds, and yes, even in casual conversations with friends. You'll learn to recognize what Montell calls cultish language. And once you start hearing it, trust me, you won't be able to unhear it. This is your backstage pass to understanding how perfectly ordinary people get swept into extraordinary worlds, and more importantly, how you can navigate these spaces with your eyes wide open. Let's start with that loaded word, cult. What flashes through your mind when you hear it? Maybe a secluded compound somewhere in the desert. People in matching outfits? That infamous poisoned Kool-Aid? For most of us, the word paints a picture of something dark, dangerous, and, crucially, something that happens to other people. Naive people. Desperate people. Definitely not us. But Montell asks us to lean in closer. She poses this brilliant question. What's the real difference between a young woman who abandons her entire life for a yoga group and another young woman who becomes completely obsessed with her CrossFit gym? One ended up with severe psychological trauma, and the other walked away with a strained hamstring and some ridiculously overpriced leggings. The consequences couldn't be more different, yet the methods of influence, the specific language used to create that powerful sense of belonging and separation from the outside world, were remarkably similar. This is where cultish gets really interesting. Influence isn't like a light switch, either on or off. It's not simply cult versus not a cult. Instead, picture it as a spectrum, a continuum. At one end, you've got healthy, life-enhancing communities, like sports fans, book clubs, or your tight-knit friend group. At the far opposite end, you've got genuinely destructive groups like Jonestown or Heaven's Gate. And sandwiched in between? Pretty much everything else. Your intense spin class, that startup with the suspiciously zealous company culture, political movements, Instagram wellness gurus, even certain makeup brands with their devoted followers. Here's the thing. We are, fundamentally, cultish beings. Humans have always needed two essential ingredients to survive and thrive: a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose. We're simply not built for loneliness. Our brains literally release feel-good chemicals when we participate in group rituals, whether that's chanting together or singing in unison. We carry this primal, bone-deep fear of being cast out from the tribe. Charismatic leaders throughout history have learned to tap into this vulnerability and, in the worst cases, weaponize it. In the past, organized religion filled this role almost by default. But today, especially for younger generations, that landscape has shifted dramatically. More people identify as spiritual, but not religious. Yet, that fundamental need for community and meaning hasn't disappeared. It's just finding new homes. We find it at SoulCycle. We find it in startups that proudly advertise their cult-like culture. We find it following a charismatic self-help guru on Instagram. These new forms of community are sprouting up everywhere, promising to deliver what traditional institutions no longer provide: an identity, a tribe, and a framework for living. And what's the single most powerful tool for constructing these alternate worlds? It's not mind-altering substances, or physical coercion, or some mystical form of brainwashing. It's language, pure and simple. Language is how a leader constructs an entire mini-universe, complete with its own logic, values, and rules. It's how they build an us and simultaneously create a them. Montell argues convincingly that all charismatic leaders, from the most dangerous cult figures to the most inspiring fitness instructors, draw from essentially the same linguistic playbook. To really understand this toolkit, let's travel to the most extreme edge of the influence spectrum. Let's talk about Jonestown. You've probably heard the expression, drinking the Kool-Aid. We toss it around casually to describe blindly following a trend. Yeah, I finally drank the Kool-Aid and bought a Peloton, someone might joke. But for the survivors of the People's Temple, that phrase carries unimaginable horror. Because they know what actually happened. First, a technical correction. It wasn't even Kool-Aid. It was a cheaper knockoff brand called Flavor Aid. But more importantly, the 900 people who died in Guyana in 1978 didn't do so mindlessly or willingly. Many were murdered, either by forced injection or at gunpoint. They were children, families, people who had followed Jim Jones not toward death, but toward a dream of a better life, a socialist paradise free from the racism and inequality plaguing 1970s America. So how did it spiral into such unthinkable tragedy? How did Jones convince so many people to follow him literally to the ends of the earth? Survivors consistently point to one thing: his absolute mastery of language. Jim Jones was what you might call a linguistic shapeshifter. Around older religious folks, he spoke like a traditional reverend, quoting scripture with passion. With young progressive activists, he transformed into a political intellectual, dropping references to Nietzsche. He possessed this uncanny ability to mirror your language, to make you feel like he'd known you your entire life. This is what experts sometimes call love bombing, an overwhelming flood of validation and attention, designed to build trust quickly and, ultimately, establish control. Jones was an absolute master of the first tool in the Cultish toolkit, creating a stark us versus them worldview. He accomplished this through carefully crafted vocabulary. His followers became my children, while everyone else belonged to the sinister, outside forces. Anyone who left was immediately labeled a traitor. The corrupt government was controlled by mysterious, hidden rulers. This specialized jargon serves two purposes simultaneously. First, it makes insiders feel special, chosen, part of an exclusive club with secret knowledge. Second, it transforms the outside world from merely different into something threatening and inferior. This technique extends far beyond Jonestown. Virtually every group along the spectrum uses some version of it. In the Heaven's Gate UFO group, members were students of the Kingdom of Heaven, while outsiders were trapped in a Luciferian program. Even in CrossFit, the gym becomes the go box, and the instructors are coaches, subtle linguistic shifts that create bonding and separation from the ordinary world of regular gyms and trainers. Once that us versus them reality is firmly established, leaders deploy a second powerful tool, loaded language. This happens when everyday words get assigned new, emotionally charged meanings. Montell shares Tasha's story from the yoga group 3HO. In normal conversation, calling someone an old soul is a compliment, suggesting wisdom beyond their years. But inside 3HO, it was actually terrifying. It meant you'd been stuck reincarnating repeatedly, failing to achieve enlightenment each time. Years after leaving the group, Tasha still flinches when she hears that phrase. Leaders also weaponize euphemisms to soften brutal realities. Jim Jones never discussed death openly. Instead, he called it the transition, or stepping over quietly to the next plane. The leaders of Heaven's Gate didn't ask their followers to commit suicide. They instructed them to exit their vehicles so they could board the spacecraft heading to the next evolutionary level above human. This language gradually conditions people to accept concepts that would otherwise trigger every alarm bell. Now imagine you're inside one of these groups. You're beginning to have doubts. The leader's grand promises aren't materializing, and daily life feels harder than advertised. You attempt to voice your concerns, but every time you do, you're met with a simple, dismissive phrase that slams the door on further discussion. This is the third, and perhaps sneakiest tool, the thought-terminating cliché. These are catchy, definitive-sounding phrases designed to halt critical thinking in its tracks. You've encountered them in everyday life. Everything happens for a reason. It is what it is. Boys will be boys. They're essentially semantic stop signs. They end complex conversations and relieve us of the uncomfortable work of thinking deeply about difficult questions. In cultish groups, these clichés become weapons. When a follower in Jonestown questioned Jones, he might shut them down immediately. It's all the media's fault. Don't believe their lies. In Scientology, if the organization's complex belief system doesn't make sense, the problem isn't the system, it's you. You must have misunderstood words, which triggers this exhausting process called word clearing, where you're forced to look up every single word in a sentence, including amoli and beria, until you're so mentally exhausted you just stop questioning anything. The combination of these tools creates something psychologically powerful. An us versus them worldview, emotionally loaded language, and conversation-stopping clichés work together to construct a kind of reality bubble. This isn't brainwashing, in the science fiction sense of erasing someone's mind completely. Montell points out that most psychologists consider brainwashing a pseudo-scientific myth. You can't force someone to believe something they're completely unwilling to accept. Instead, this language works on people who are already somewhat open to the message. It gives them permission to believe. And this is where we transition from the extreme edge of the spectrum into territory that might feel uncomfortably familiar. Let's talk about multi-level marketing companies, or MLMs. You've definitely seen them flooding your social media. A friend from high school you haven't spoken to in years suddenly slides into your messages. Hey girl, you have such an amazing energy. Have you ever thought about becoming a boss babe and earning full-time income from home? Companies like Amway, LuLaRoe, and Herbalife operate on a pay and recruit model that is, mathematically speaking, almost guaranteed to lose money for 99% of participants. So why do so many people get sucked in and stay in, even as they're drowning in debt? Because MLMs are absolute masters of cultish language. They construct an intense us versus them universe. People with traditional 9-to-5 jobs get looked down on for having a job, which stands for jackass of a boss. MLM members, by contrast, are entrepreneurs, CEOs, and mompreneurs on an empowering mission to achieve financial independence. Their language overflows with toxic positivity and quasi-religious promises. This isn't just about selling leggings or essential oils. It's a movement. It's a life-changing opportunity. Many MLMs explicitly weave in religious language, embracing the prosperity gospel, the idea that financial wealth signals divine blessing. And they're absolute masters of the thought-terminating cliché. If you question whether the business model is actually a pyramid scheme, you're immediately hit with the stock defense. Pyramid schemes are illegal. If you're not making money, the problem isn't a flawed system. It's you. You didn't believe hard enough. You didn't work smart enough. You have stinkin' thinkin'. This is textbook gaslighting, making you doubt your own perception and blame yourself for the system's inherent failures. Now let's bring this even closer to home, to a place where many of us go to find community, release stress, and feel genuinely good about ourselves: the gym, or more specifically, the modern boutique fitness studio. Montell calls this phenomenon cult fitness, and it's a perfect example of the healthier, more benign end of the influence continuum. When you walk into a SoulCycle studio, the walls are plastered with mantras. We aspire to inspire, addicted, obsessed, unnaturally attached to our bikes. The instructor isn't just leading a workout. They're a guru, a therapist, a spiritual guide. They're taking you on a journey, a 45-minute exorcism, where you don't just transform your body, you transform your life. The language is deeply ritualized. There are chants, affirmations, call and response moments. In a fitness format called intensati, you literally punch the air while shouting, "I am powerful beyond measure." This might sound absurd to an outsider, but for the people inside that dark, candlelit room, it's genuinely transcendent. It's a space where they feel safe, seen, and connected to something larger. It provides what church used to offer older generations: ritual, community, and meaning. For the most part, this is actually healthy. The crucial difference between a SoulCycle class and a destructive cult is that the ritual time has clear boundaries. When class ends, you unclip from your bike and return to your normal life. The exit costs are minimal. Nobody's going to threaten you or demand you cut off your family if you decide to try yoga instead. But even here, on the gentler end of the spectrum, the potential for exploitation lurks. When instructors get elevated to guru status, abuses of power become possible. When a company like Core Power Yoga uses a spiritual concept like returning the karma to pressure instructors into working for free, it's twisting the language of enlightenment for corporate profit. Finally, we arrive at the newest and perhaps most pervasive cult of all, the one living in your pocket: social media. In the past, joining a cult required physical commitment. You had to travel somewhere: a church, a commune, a studio. Today, the barrier to entry is literally a double tap on your screen. The internet has birthed a new breed of leader: the spiritual influencer. Gurus like Bentinho Massaro and Teal Swan use Instagram and YouTube to build massive followings, promising access to higher vibrations, alternate dimensions, and even secrets to becoming a human god. They deploy all the classic cultish tools. They establish an us versus them dynamic where their followers are awake and everyone else is trapped in the matrix. Their language overflows with pseudoscientific jargon like quantum fields, upgrading your DNA, and 5D consciousness, creating an illusion of elite, secret knowledge. Their feeds are filled with thought-terminating cliches disguised as inspirational quotes, designed to bypass logic and reason. Massaro literally tells his followers to start destroying their allegiances to logic. The algorithm itself functions like a cult leader. It studies you, learns your beliefs, then feeds you a perfectly curated reality that reinforces those beliefs, sending you spiraling deeper down rabbit holes until you rarely encounter opposing viewpoints. This is how a seemingly harmless wellness community can gradually bleed into dangerous conspiracy theories like QAnon. The language overlaps significantly. The Great Awakening. Do your research. Trust the plan. The algorithm connects these dots, creating a pipeline from yoga influencers straight into dangerous political extremism. In this bizarre new world, we're all simultaneously followers and leaders of our own tiny cults, curating our beliefs and broadcasting them to our audience. Social media has, in a strange way, democratized cultishness. There's potentially a cult for everyone. So after this journey through yoga groups, pyramid schemes, and the shadowy corners of the internet, what's the real takeaway? Should we become cynics? Trust no one and join nothing? I don't think so. Actually, I believe the message of Cultish is the opposite. It's not a warning to run away from community, but rather a guide on how to run toward it with your eyes wide open. Amanda Montell demonstrates that the desire to belong, to find meaning, and to believe in something larger than ourselves isn't a character flaw. It's actually one of the most beautiful and essential aspects of being human. The danger isn't in the seeking itself. It's in being unaware of the linguistic tools that can manipulate that search. The most valuable lesson from this book is recognizing that language isn't just descriptive. It's creative. It literally builds worlds. And once you understand the architecture of that language, the us versus them framing, the loaded terminology, the conversation-stopping cliches, you become nearly impossible to trap. You gain the power to consciously choose which worlds you want to inhabit. So here are a few practical things you can start doing immediately, armed with this new awareness. First, listen carefully for exclusivity. When you encounter any group, whether online, at work, or in your social circle, pay attention to how they discuss outsiders. Is there a genuine sense of openness, or is there a subtle, or sometimes not so subtle, language of superiority? Specialized jargon and insider language can be fun and bonding, but they can also signal that a group's identity depends on looking down on others. Second, question the cliches. When you're wrestling with a complex problem, and someone offers a simple, neatly packaged answer that discourages further exploration, like, "It's just God's plan, don't be ruled by fear," or, "The media is all propaganda," pause for a moment. Ask yourself, is this phrase opening up the conversation and inviting deeper thought? Or is it trying to shut down discussion? Real wisdom rarely fits on a bumper sticker. And finally, trust your gut. Both your logical mind and your emotional instincts exist for good reasons. If a leader's language leaves you feeling confused, diminished, or like you're somehow crazy for having doubts, that's a form of gaslighting. A healthy community, a leader worth following, will never demand that you sacrifice your own sense of reality. They'll welcome scrutiny. Understanding cultish language doesn't mean you need to quit your favorite workout class or unfollow every spiritual teacher on Instagram. It means you can participate with awareness. You can enjoy the community, draw inspiration, engage in meaningful rituals without letting it consume your entire identity. You can keep one foot in that special world and one foot firmly planted in your own reality. That was a summary of Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism, by Amanda Montell. We've explored the main ideas together today, but I'll be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. It shows you the terrain, the major cities, the important roads, but it can never replace the experience of actually walking those streets yourself. The real magic of this book reveals itself when you read it personally. It's in those quiet moments when a specific story or a particularly clever insight connects with your own experience in an unexpected way. This summary exists to help you decide whether this book deserves your time and attention. If anything we've explored today sparked your curiosity, I genuinely encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about absorbing information. It's an experience that can authentically change the way you hear and interpret the world around you. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Doing so ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another perspective-shifting book from some of the world's most fascinating thinkers. Your support helps us keep growing this community together. Thank you for listening.